Yeah, good morning, all of you. I'm going to, we are going to have what I would say, once upon a time, an young scholar. With her, I had a long walk in the evening to discuss a PhD topic. That's what I remember. She came with an original topic, then we decided that we'll change. But which direction we took, she took the right direction. That is where she is today. And I'm referring to Professor Lekha Chakraborty, professor at NIPFP. And she has I would say, a highly notable distinction of the elected member of the governing board of management of International Institute of Public Finance, Munich. This is the World Association of Public Finance Economists. For in any discipline, I'll tell you these matters later, because I remember Harilal used to tell me that everyone working on electronics is in a network, but you are not. Unless you are with the scholars of your category, you will not be known. If you want to be known, the first step is to ensure that you are in the particular group of scholars in that. And here, the most important global network of public finance scholars is the International Institute of Public Finance, and she is the governing body member of that. So, that means where Professor Lekha Chakraborty is. See, and she has worked on wide range. She has worked on wide range of issues in public finance. But I think here, in my mind, her most important contribution is in terms of mainstreaming gender budgeting. And that's something which she has been systematically working, and she's known for her effort in that. Her recent book is actually on that issue. And she's also a research affiliate of the Levy Economics Institute at Bard College in New York. And her areas of interest, as I said, I think she's on it. You must be knowing her book jointly with Professor T.M. Thomas Isaac on fiscal federalism. It's a very interesting read and very simply done. I mean, heavily empirical and analytical, and also with the seal of three people, I would say. Isaac seal, he brings all together the combination of the capabilities of three sets of scholars. Truly, it's a very small book, but it's an area where you can actually take off from there to very different levels. And he works on fiscal federalism, of course, macroeconomic, public finance, financing, human development, indeed gender budgeting. And she is the recipient of the Infosys much coveted Best PhD Thesis Award from the Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore. She is the author of Fiscal Consolidation, Budget Details and Budget Deficits and Macroeconomy. It's published by Sage Publication, which is much well commented by none other than Dr. Y.V. Reddy. You should read Y.V. Reddy and Reddy. There's a book recently on fiscal federalism. And other international scholars has also commented very well on this book, including Victor Tansi, the former IMF Executive Director on Fiscal Affairs. And the other book which comes to my mind is this Socialist Sector in Decentralized Economy, India in the Era of Globalization, again published by Cambridge University Press. And she has been consultant or associated with multilateral organizations like UNESCAP, UNDP, UN Women, the Commonwealth Secretariat, so on and so forth. And she is a prolific writer, and she makes her presence felt and her views conveyed through both print and visual media. I think these are all very rare accomplishments. For me, she's still an young scholar. So I take pride in that. She is. I had the privilege of associating or being with her when she was young, and of course, we have been continuing our personal relationship, not professional. So, thank you very much, Lekha. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that warm Welcome. And, you have seen me since 1995, and that hand-holding you have done in the initial, phase of my life, that's unforgettable. And all the faculty members of CDS, I do remember. So just like, around the table, just like these scholars, I sat, in front of you in 1995. Then, the journey has been a journey of ups and downs. My thesis, was on macroeconomic impact of fiscal deficit. But when I joined NIPFP, they allocate projects just based on a random, it's not based on what you have done for your PhD. So that was my first challenge. I didn't complete my PhD when I joined NIPFP. That was in 2000, after the residential requirement in CDS. When Pinaki moved to, New Delhi to join the Finance Commission, 11th Finance Commission, I asked my supervisor, I completed my residential requirement. Can I join him? Can I go with him? Accompany him to New Delhi? I will work from there. So that's the way it happened. After the residential requirement, I moved to Delhi. Then within 6 months, advertisement came from an IPFP that they are looking for economists. Both of us applied, Pinaki and me, and we got into an IPFP. So first interview, first job, and I didn't change my job. In between, when my child was born, in between, I came back to CDS as associate professor, and I thought that I will continue my journey as a teacher in NIPFP, but many random things happened and I needed to go back to New Delhi. So in my career, if you look at my positions, my permanent positions or affiliations were with NIPFP and CDS. All other affiliations Professor Joseph mentioned were short stints. And you don't have to fear that you don't have the capability of networking. So how will my work will get showcased? So those kind of fears I also had, because, I was very quiet. Professor Joseph knows me very well. I was very quiet in the beginning, but work speaks. It happened like this for me. My first project, as I mentioned, it was not related to my PhD. On the first day of joining an IPFP, I was given the terms of reference of gender budgeting. And that is in 2000, when, country didn't have any models of, incorporating gender into fiscal space. So that was a challenge. At that time, in the corridors of NIPFP, were scholars looking into, expenditure, intergovernmental fiscal transfers, fiscal federalism. So this gender was very alien, and, they couldn't digest or accept the fact that gender can be within the realm of public finance. But I was given the project. My director, the top of the institute, was with me. After completing the interim report, we presented the gender budgeting, the preliminary report, in front of the faculty members of an IPFP. And all the senior professors asked the director of an IPFP to roll back this project. This project is not a cup of tea of a premier institute like NIPFP, who is working on public finance issues. Gender is not our cup of tea. You need to roll back. But that time, Ashok Lahiri was the director. The top was very open. He was very sensitive to the new kind of research that's happening. And the world was very silent on incorporating gender into public finance, except for 2-3 articles in World Development. There was a movement in the world that time on gender and macroeconomics. So it was an international working group. So I didn't have exposure to that international working group then. So I was very lonely because nobody started appreciating the work. Recognition was a major issue because it was a new project, and gender, it was looked down upon. So, and I also understood that it depends on the first project you get. It depends on that, the way you work, the career path in front of you unfold. So I was very confused and very sad, in fact, because my work was not getting recognition. So more than my gender, it was a topic given to me, which was very pioneering nature. So getting a recognition was my challenge. So if you ask me in the career path, as a woman, did I face anything? No. In our institute, maybe that may be an exception, but women economists didn't face anything because of the gender, but the challenges were same for men and women. The challenges were the acceptance of our work by the stakeholders, especially the Ministry of Finance, because the public policy research that has to get translated into public policy prescription. It was little different from the academic research. So as students, you need to take a call. In the long run, you need to join a think tank, a public policy institute, or you want to be in the proper academic field. So these you have to take a call, because the vocabulary you speak, the moment I write anything about econometric models or the inferences from the models, and if I speak that alpha, beta, gamma to finance ministry and the finance minister to translate that research into a public policy prescriptive, then you will be sidelined because your vocabulary is not okay. So as students, we need to understand the content, what we research, that technical knowledge, we should have the ability to translate into wider audience. So as researchers, you can take an exercise like your technical knowledge. You start writing small pieces for, as columns or a blog in, GIFT. You started articulating your paper for the wider audience in 1,000 words. So that exercise was very important, because initially from CDS, when we, joined, so our, vocabulary was that of an economist and was of that of an academician. But that language policymakers don't understand. So to switch and re-switch, what is your research and how do you communicate to a wider audience, that exercise, it is very crucial. As students, you need to keep that in the back of your mind, because otherwise the content creation, you may be get one-sided. Because if you are a technical, if you're very comfortable in articulating in the technical language, then your papers will get accepted in the international journals. And if you can translate or disseminate that paper into, a column or a blog or, a piece for wider audience, then the last mile you are running. Otherwise, it just stop at the level of publication in international journal. But as scholars, your ultimate aim is to contribute to your country, how your research is getting translated into public policy. So that, you have to take a call that you want to do that, or you want to stop at the level of academician, and that path you need to be very cautious. Otherwise, that language, the vocabulary, everything, you need to get adjusted, but it is very easy to be, doing both things, because Parama and of course, Professor Joseph, the scholars in front of you, young faculty members, and of course, your director, we all have done that. And so it's not a big thing. Now, coming to the topics I researched, as I mentioned, gender budgeting was a new topic that time. And, many scholars, and I do remember a question raised by a young scholar in the book release function about what exactly you are doing in gender budgeting. So those kind of issues were there on board, that what exactly, but it was a promising framework, and a lot of things were done first from the ex post perspective, like how much country is spending for women, then using very good methodologies like public expenditure benefit incidence analysis, the fiscal policy and inequality issues were looked into through a gender lens. So it evolved over time. But that framework, that capacity, as Professor M. Govindrao pointed out, that scope is still, unexplored. So we have that promising framework, and we need to experiment many things which lead to the financial empowerment of women or economic empowerment of women, rather than reinforcing the stereotyped gender roles. So that point, by the scholar for that book release function, that point is very well taken. But I need to tell that there are many innovative primary surveys that's happening now to capture the workforce participation of women. And also, if you look into the thesis from the theoretical point of view, there is a hypothesis called feminization view. Like when economy progresses, initially you may see a dip in the female economic participation rate, but there will be a U-turn. So that depends on many factors. So why that feminization is not happening across the world, or especially in India, an emerging country like India? These questions are explored now with dignity and seriousness, including, IMF. Earlier they were very close to the idea of gender into macro policy framework. But since 2016, IMF asked the member nations to incorporate gender budgeting as a public financial management tool. So that happened from a primary, primary in the sense, from a very pioneering survey, a global survey, which happened in IMF on gender budgeting. And I was leading that work from Asia Pacific. So the scholars, increasingly getting realized in the multilateral organizations that we can't, get the growth picture all right if you don't incorporate the gender concerns. Because if the fastest and the smartest way to increase your GDP, especially in this, geopolitical uncertainties and pandemic times, is to increase the female labor force participation rate. So that was accepted, globally. So that's the smartest way to increase your GDP. Because when we talk about the potential GDP, we are not counting the contribution of women into the economy. And we are not getting, where are the efficient women? Because I can see a lot of young girls in front of me. But, after a point of time, if you are not there on board, if you're not there working, what are the kind of, stress, or what are the kind of decisions you have taken to quit the market, or what are the kind of, intra-household bargaining you need to do to remain in this field? So these are concerns, and mostly it is not patriarchal questions. But when it comes to a practical question, within the intra-household, we take a decision that the women will adjust. So those kind of, stress, how can government support? So these beautiful questions were asked by the Scandinavian countries. In Scandinavian countries, you can understand that the gender development index or the human development index is quite good. And you have seen the recent debates about the Finland Prime Minister. She was, vehemently arguing for her work-life balance. So these are the perspectives when a woman get to the top of, the top position. So, there are issues with the perspectives, but there are practical issues which we try to capture through care economy infrastructure. Because mostly the macroeconomic policies are confined to, just the mainstream, we call it as market economy, in the sense, what is monetized, that get measured. What is unmeasured, it's not a cup of tea of a policymaker. So now the challenge is to lift that statistical invisibility of the care economy and to get the care economy on board, so that a policymaker can focus on both the statistically invisible care economy and the market economy, so that the economic well-being, the overall economic well-being of a country will be double, rather than just focusing on, what is monetized and what is your 8 hours work, what are the incentives or support system we need to provide for the women in the workforce, that can be quite skewed. So this care economy policies, that's evolving now. And ILO has taken it up very seriously to look into the care economic infrastructure, which can support women. And, all these things, if it manifests across the world, then, we can, this statement was by Christine Lagarde, that the fastest and the smartest way to develop a country is to have women on board, or to increase female economic force participation rate. So, or a female economic activity rate, fear. So if fear increase, it's good for your country. So that's one stream of work, I'm doing. And I know that some of you are aware of my works. And the recognition for this work, it came in the second phase, in the sense, any fiscal innovation, of course, gender budgeting is a long-term public financial management tool. And, it is a fiscal innovation. And as an innovation, it travels through many stages, many processes. So first is, of course, the knowledge building, the specific models that is very specific to a country you need to understand. So those kind of research and that capabilities, that is the first phase of any innovation. Then to translate that knowledge into a public policy, you need institutions. So institutional mechanisms were given importance, and I was lucky to be the part of that phase as well, that I closely worked with the chief economic advisor then to translate this research into a public policy prescription. There, the challenge was to understand what are the analytical matrices we need to identify and what are the institutional mechanisms we need to design to translate a research into a public policy prescription or a public policy tool. Third phase. Once it is rolled out, capacity building is very important, and the state capacity. So the issues related to the state capacity at the center and the subnational governments, even at the third tier, was the third challenge. And now India is into the fourth phase of this fiscal innovation, that is accountability mechanisms. And CAG is taking it up, but we need to strengthen the accountability mechanisms. Otherwise, gender budgeting, that promising framework that remain as a fiscal transparency tool, rather than, we can proudly say that it's a tool of accountability. So these are the 4 stages in which, gender budgeting unfolded. And these 4 phases, I have captured in the recent book Professor mentioned, that is on the fiscal policy for sustainable development in Asia Pacific with gender budgeting in India as a special focus. That's a book by Palgrave Macmillan, which is just published. So I was lucky to be with gender budgeting, and in a way, as a child, gender budgeting was growing, and as an economist, I was growing. We grew up together. That's a way I can say. And growing up process was very tough, because it was a pioneering project, and getting recognition in the corridors of public finance for a new project, now, when I accept humbly that you're a pioneer, but that journey was not that okay. So you have to be very consistent, and I hope that in the future or in the long run, things will be all right. But that I have gone through that terrible times I have gone through. But when it was accepted by the Ministry of Finance as a chapter in the economic survey for the first time in India, then it was in an open, Ministry of Finance opened a page in the, budget documents to state the gender budgeting. But gender budgeting statement is just a tool. More work needs to be done. That is a transparency tool. So that was a recognition. And, globally, India is getting recognition because we have gone ahead with the intergovernmental fiscal transfers and how we can incorporate gender. Those kind of, discussions are advancing. And with the advent of fiscal decentralization, the gender budgeting is taken up at the local level as well. And now, my director Ashok Lahiri used to tell me, Lekha, you're very passionate and you are very devoted to the work on gender budgeting you are doing, but what about your thesis? So that was in the second year of my work. I joined in 2000. By 2001, he started giving me that, now you're enjoying the new recognition, but what about your thesis? So that was a challenge. That was a time in which, Indian economy has started thinking about fiscal rules. It coincided. And my thesis was, talking about with empirical evidence that deficit is good. Getting recognition for an argument that deficit is good when the country is rolling out fiscal rules, when you're asked to do 3% of your GDP, the fiscal deficit, then the kind of work you will get recognition only in certain closed circles, like heterodox school of thought. Because in CDS we have heterodox training, excuse me, I'll have water. We have heterodox training, because we need to understand that macroeconomics, it's not just, one-sided. You have many beautiful schools of thought. It is not that neoclassical school of thought, because that is very predominant. But given the CDS training, any CDS students for that matter, we can appreciate all schools of thought. So given that heterodox training, and I'm working with, government. So that is another confusion. But Professor I.S. Gulati, told Pinaki and me when we joined an IPFP that be open, be apolitical. So, you have seen the Twitter handle of Professor Govindarao. He has written there, public finance economies without prejudice. So that is very important as students, you need to work without prejudice, because if you get into an ideological inclination, it can limit your understanding. So I'm not asking you to be apolitical like me, but you need to have an open mind so that, bipartisan kind of dialogues regarding a public policy is very important to take the public policies prescriptions ahead. So that bipartisan debates, in parliament or in legislature, or in academic institutions, that's very important for the, your development of your country. So that's another thing I want to flag, because in an IPFP, we needed to work with various governments. So that bipartisan perspective with technical sound, prescriptions, that was very crucial for us to follow. And, that suffocates sometimes, but that was a challenge to work with, different governments. And, it is not like IAS or bureaucrats, which is working directly with them. But even then, when we are a think tank, when we are working for a think tank, institute of Ministry of Finance, these kind of suffocations can happen in between. So these were, other challenges. So I submitted my thesis, and as Professor mentioned, I published that work by SAGE. And that time, in 2016, the country was in the mood of, fiscal rules. So my book, if you ask me, it got recognition. Of course, it got recognition in the heterodox school of thought, but slowly, when fiscal policy started becoming accommodative, then, world is started accepting that the deficit is good in the time of crisis. Those kind of understanding happened even prior to the pandemic. Then, slowly, I started getting recognition, and I talked about, the impact of fiscal deficit on various macroeconomic variables. So I couldn't find any major, a kind of villain. The deficit is a kind of villain in interest rate determination or anything, because that time, most of the theories or the empirical works, they talked about the impact of deficits on interest rate determination. And that's one of the way in which, deficit was argued against. Then crowding out. But now the country owned that argument that if you increase your deficit and use it for capital formation in the economy, that's going to crowd in private investment. So a kind of, you refuted the neoclassical argument of crowding out, and that's very well the policy prescriptions now we are listening to. So, things evolve, nothing, even in the science, I heard that, a Newton era and Einstein era, even in the science, 2 + 2 is not always 4. And then, in economics, we deal with stochasticity, because if you run any econometric models, these are not deterministic models. Given certain things, given the error term, that stochasticity you need to appreciate. So these are the quick thoughts I thought I will share with you. Now I will listen to your questions and fine-tune the next part of my lecture. Over to you. Thank you, Professor. Parama, you are doing the round table. It's open to students to ask me questions.
Good morning, ma'am.
Yeah.
My name is Vipasha Rehajong. So actually, it's not exactly a question, but I would like to add to the point where you were saying the gender budgeting is an important tool. I would say that it is an important tool, but how we develop the tool is also very much important. And since gender budgeting at times, if it could be sort of gender blind, even if we're trying to make it neutral. And in that sense, I feel like And like Anna has also mentioned during the previous talk, that it could reinforce a lot of gender stereotypes by accepting women's current state or position in the society as such. It could just be a mixture of like adding women into the process of development, and yeah, for the sake of it. So
Yeah.
that's why it's not just like planning programs, but also important to see how the programs are identified, which would entail not just looking at the needs or following a needs-based approach, but also like understanding the social structure itself, and which
Absolutely.
could be done by seeing how women, and not just women, but men also spend their time. So in that sense, time use becomes a very important survey in this, and I think we should work towards developing that survey so that it would be transparent. A lot of idiosyncrasies of how an individual in a macro economy spends their time, and altogether this would be widely beneficial in prescribing like apt policies, and not just by limiting the finances within gender budgeting, but also like in each and every nuance of the economic structure could also be reformed so that it becomes truly gender sensitive or neutral.
Absolutely. Bipasha, I do agree with you. And that day Anna talked, that's what you mentioned, right? So both of your points are very well taken. It's not like adding women and stirring it. So that's not what we talk about, gender budgeting. And these aspects you have pointed out, that how we can design and incorporate, gender concerns into fiscal policy. And, that is, in detail, that's there in the chapters of my new book. And as you mentioned, it is important to have ex-ante gender budgeting. And that's what, Professor Govindrao also mentioned that day. And I do take your point. That's a very beautiful point. You talk about that of the individuals. It's a concept of autonomous individual, and public policy prescriptions talking about, the way Bipasha highlighted about an autonomous individual, that's very alien to India, because in the Scandinavian countries, that public policy revolution happened from Northern Europe. That concept of accepting the autonomous individual. And, I have seen the documentary. So the acceptance of the public policy was that, the real love and care and responsibility in a society happens when the individuals are fundamentally independent of each other. So what's the role of the state to give that independence so that people can live with dignity? So that's the role of the state. So this acceptance, as you rightly mentioned, we have to wait and see that how the policy makers take that point. And that beautiful point, I do welcome that point. But that's happened only, that revolution happened only in Northern Europe. And in Scandinavian countries, things developed because of the acceptance of that basic assumption you highlighted about that autonomous individual. That but it happens. The moment you give, that dignity to that individual to live independent, that dignity. But if you look at the public finance prescriptions through the life cycle, that lens also, you can see that only a few, policies are related to that. And this is also closely related to the demographic dividend or the dependent population, and how you are designing, public policy or public finance for, elderly and for the dependent population. So these are very closely connected. Using a gender lens, you can advance the research. And, I hope that Bipasha and Anna will take up these issues in your thesis. And I don't know whether you have already come up with a proposal and you're going to continue with that, and or you are only now it's a thinking process. You have to present your thesis little later. The proposal little later. I don't know, or whether you have already decided on the topic. So over to you.
Thank you, ma'am.
So you have decided your topic, or?
Actually, I am working towards sort of looking into the framework of national income accounting, but in terms of revenues. And sometimes I do have this confusion, like if I'm looking into national income accounting as such, would it limit my, the whole philosophy of not just looking into the finances, but also incorporating all of these theories where you say that it shouldn't be limited to a particular structure. So,
Oh, great. You can take up the systems of national accounts, 1993. In 1993, United Nations Statistical Division, they extended the production boundary of what are the kinds of goods and services needed to be included within the SNA. So in that SNA 1993, when the production boundary was extended, certain kind of activities which you are concerned about, which is unmonetized, that got into. But then a time use survey you can superimpose to understand. You also mentioned about the time use survey to understand the structure. But when you trichotomize like systems of national accounts, SNA, then extended SNA as after the 1993, then the non-SNA, because certain kind of works or activities you cannot give a value to it or you cannot monetize it. So those kind of things you need not measure. But in these trichotomizing the national income accounts or the systems of national accounts, then you will be able to incorporate all the elements, that structure, that structural transformation. That's a beautiful word. That's ultimate purpose of an economic development. So for that, you need to incorporate these things. But as you mentioned, we are just focusing on SNA and what is there monetized and measured, and that's very skewed. So we need to take this debates on national income accounts further, and even the potential output, the way we calculate is also an underestimate. So it's all closely linked. It's a macro question, though it's very much linked to the gender concerns or the labor force participation, because in ILO, I was approached by the ILO specialists to argue for the scale economy and the labor force policies as macro, just like the way I have done for gender, because that's a way, because otherwise it's not the labor ministry, that ILO should be working with. They wanted their issues to be macro. So what kind of, research we need to do to make this labor issues as a macro issue, just like the way we have, won the war on gender, because gender was very much a micro concept or a microeconomics, micro work. But now, it is accepted as a macro. So these are the concerns ILO, raised, and I may be working with them very soon on this. So these are questions like the way you pointed out, that structure, how can it be a comprehensive structure rather than just skewed to, monetized, measured, and what is unmeasured, it's not the part of policymaker. Yeah.
thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you.
Good morning, ma'am.
Yes.
Ma'am, I'm Anna Maria Abraham.
Okay.
Ma'am, actually, I would like to thank you first. I did a work on gender budgeting under ISEC Bangalore, and your works has helped me a lot in doing the work. So I would like to thank you first. And the question that I would like to ask, we know that when it is coming to gender inequality, global gender gap and everything, the India has slipped to about 140th rank among 156 countries last year in terms of high wage gap and everything. So I would like to ask, how can we incorporate this wage gap issue in the policy formulating issue? That is one question I would like to ask. Another question, I don't know whether it is very trivial to ask a question like this to you. Even in the field of entertainment, like in cinemas or other fields like that, there is a huge wage gap that is happening. Very wide wage gap is there, and it is a heated debate whether the women or the lead actresses should be paid the same amount that is to that of the hero of the films and all. So I would like to ask your view on the same. How can we do anything? Is it just completely based on the entertainment purpose, or is it there anything else that can be done on the same? So yes, ma'am.
Okay, good. Okay, Maria, right? Anna Maria. Thank you for those questions. And, wage gap is a wider debate, gender wage gap, it's not confined to entertainment. It is therefore all the sectors. But I can understand that the way the Women's Collective has taken it up and given dignity to this issue in Kerala, that was very well accepted and acknowledged by the finance minister. When Isaac was the finance minister, he acknowledged that even in the budget, he acknowledged that, and he has given a certain allocation for looking into those issues and all. But this wage gap is not confined to entertainment sector. Gender wage gap. One thing is a downward harmonization of men's wages, and then also we will get the wage gap corrected. But that's not what we want, especially in the time of economic crisis. Men's wages are also coming down. So when you look into the wage gap, you may feel that the gender wage gap is better right now, but it might have happened through the downward harmonization of men's wages. That's not what we want to. What we want is, for the equal work, for the equal skill, equal pay. That's the way we argue, but that's not happening. And what are the reasons for that? Is it an ad hoc prescription of the wages, or is it determined by the social norms, many non-economic factors, economic factors? So these kind of studies has happened, and we need to take a look into that. And most of the times, it's not the ad hoc prescriptions, many non-economic factors. So it's a kind of wage determination model you need to look into. And there, the moment you put the variable of wage gap, so you have to be very cautious whether that wage gap got reduced because of the downward harmonization of men's wages, or whether it's based on that, what I mentioned as the equal work, equal skill, and different wages. So that's a little tricky. The moment you use that gap, that can be a little tricky. But in the Western world, they are grappling with this gender wage gap issues. In our country, the gender wage gap was not getting that attention because the gender budgeting is still grappling with the capability deprivation in health, in education. It is little skewed to that concerns about the capability deprivation. But as you rightly mentioned, we need to take the research ahead to the wage gap differentials as well. Yeah. So if you are thinking about working on gender, happy to discuss. But Anna Maria, you have decided on your topic for your PhD? Bipasha mentioned that she may be working something related to national income accounts and public policy. Yeah.
Ma'am, I did a proposal on impact of trickling down in the economies of India and US. Currently, I thought I'll do the work on the same.
Trickling down?
Yeah, yes, impact of trickling.
Of course, then the public policy measures are very important, because trickling down doesn't happen. And we need to take the macroeconomic framework ahead to growth plus paradigm. Right now, the constraints of the macroeconomic framework is that it's focusing too much on growth, economic growth, and we believe that it will trickle down. Yes. So I don't know the inferences from your work, but mostly, when the growth itself doesn't work, we need to focus on growth and public policy. And that debate by, Bhagavati and Amartya Sen, yes. That growth is not everything, but we need to, look into. And I don't know, what are your inferences on the trickling down?
Yes, ma'am. I would like to do the work on the same, how it is helping, how the government policies is going to help, whether there is anything happening, or whether there is any trickling down is happening. That is the work that I would like to work on. And I don't know whether after the coursework and all, whether the area will
you change. Okay. But this question is important from the perspective of economic stimulus packages as well, because now all the pandemic economics, that's focusing on growth recovery. But if you unpack the pandemic packages across countries, I have done a work for Asia Pacific for UN, so we couldn't see any solid policy components related to addressing inequality concerns, because more or less the focus of the economic stimulus packages or the pandemic economics was growth, the growth recovery, that U-shaped or V-shaped growth recovery. But the components related to, social security measures, food security measures, then social infrastructure, especially health and education, and government acting as an employer of last resort. These are the 4 items, we put in the metrics to understand that which are the countries which focused on these things. But it was very insignificant, and more or less the pandemic economics focused on economic growth. But as serious students, we always look into growth with equity. But the equity related components of the pandemic packages or the economic stimulus packages across countries, that were just insignificant. So, this is an important topic against the backdrop of pandemic economics as well. In the time of post-COVID or post-pandemic fiscal policy strategy formulation and public policy strategy formulation, it is very important question that you need to focus on growth plus. Otherwise it is trickling down. That's not happening. But we didn't learn. Even in the pandemic times, it was a humanitarian crisis. It was a human tragedy. But more or less across world, we focused on economic growth. And of course, there are exceptions. Using the principle of subsidiarity, the decisions, need to be taken at the level closest to the government. That time, subnational governments, decentralization play a major role. So some of the subnational governments address these concerns, but in general, national governments, or in general, economic growth was the focus, not the growth plus or any sustainable development aspects.
Sure, ma'am, I'll look into it. Thank you.
Hello, ma'am. I'm Nivedita.
Yes.
Ma'am,
Yeah.
I'm interested to do a research work on childcare economy and its relation to public policy. And I could find that there is a huge public policy gap in addressing the problems of childcare economy. And 87% of these public daycare centers are also unfunded. So how can we address this problem of public policy gap, and how it will affect the women empowerment, because women are the major beneficiaries of these daycare centers? Yes, ma'am. That's
Good. Okay, good question. Nivedita, right?
Yes.
Professor Govindrao worked with UNICEF about these aspects on how you can incorporate the child-related fiscal policy, of course, but the concern is like in the case of Scandinavian countries, if you spend 1% of your public expenditure related to childcare, your GDP will grow up by 4 percentage points or something like that. Those kind of huge results you get when you look into the empirical evidence of Scandinavian countries. But in the context of emerging countries, and especially we grapple with many development issues, there, policy linkages between the childcare fiscal policy and the outcome that may not be that direct, but it is very important because we are not focusing just on the childcare. There are many other elements also related to what constrains the women from doing coming to the market economy. So childcare is one thing, but in Canada they have the compassionate care policies. Like if you are away from your duty or your job to take care of the ailing relative, it is treated with dignity, and a certain period is given, and you're given the benefits like $350 or something, you're given. But in our country, we have moved ahead with the childcare policies little bit, but we don't have any compassionate care benefits. But when I say this, I'm talking only about less than 4% or less than 3% of the women in the economy, because that's the only component in the formal sector. So what are the policies related to the women and the childcare in the informal sector also needs to be incorporated in the policy making in the context of emerging economies. And, in the pandemic packages, in the Janet Yellen's pandemic packages, she has given direct cash transfers, that the childcare credits, that was a major focus in the pandemic economics of US, but in India, it was very kind of a targeted cash transfers, and it was given for a short time, and it was a tokenism. So we need to work more on these areas, and that acceptance of the status of women as a priority in the country, then only that prioritization of these issues you highlighted will come into the public policy framework. Otherwise, if you don't have the priority, if you don't have that goals related to the gender equality in a country, then it will become ad hoc. That's why the gender budgeting as a public financial management tool is very important as a long-term, a PFM tool. That's what. Otherwise, in this freebies debate also, when we talk about the privateness of the public spending, things related to the gender equality issues will also be called as freebies. So in that way, that PFM tool like gender budgeting helps to protect these issues away from those freebies debate. Yeah. Nivedita, what was your topic of the proposed PhD proposal?
Ma'am, organized childcare industry and its relation to public policy in India.
So what is your prescription? That it's very important, like, a care economy providers are very important for the women to be on board and to increase the labor force participation rate, right?
Yes, ma'am, yes.
Yes. And, there are studies in this place, Levy Economic Institute, like in many countries, the absence of mothers or absence of women in their own household, because especially in Philippines, they are going away as, nannies to take care of the children. So what is the impact of the household where the mother is leaving? These studies also are getting attention right now. The care providers, household. So these issues are very complicated. So there are many cases in which the women can work within their city. They need not travel or migrate to urban areas. So these concerns are also coming up. So it's looking into in a very comprehensive manner, that because now in many countries, the way you mentioned childcare, that facility, if it is needed, given to the women, then women will be on board, or women will be in the market economy. But in those economies, this migration of women from their own place, so that's also creating some kind of societal tensions. And, there are works which looks into these aspects as well. Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am.
Hi, ma'am.
Yes.
I'm Ashka from third batch of PhD scholars. Before a few weeks, Beena Agarwal wrote a paper or article on Indian Express regarding this labor force participation of women's and demographic structural change kind of thing.
Yeah.
In that article, she mentioned that once the TFR rate is stabilized, or on the standardized TFR rate get stabilized, the women's labor force participation will be increased. When we are looking at Kerala's experience, like Kerala stabilized their population around before 90s. If you are looking at the current data, we could find that women's labor force participation is at very low rate.
Yeah.
What is your opinion about this demographic structural change or demographic change and labor force participation?
Yeah. Thank you, Ashraf, right?
Ashkar.
Ashkar, there are two things. One, when you look into the women want to work but not getting work, that's one thing. Second, opportunities are there but women are not working. So these are two different scenarios. So there, even with the TFR improvement, the latter category may not come to the labor force. Then, we need to look into the constraints or the social norms which prevent the women from participating in the economy. So it may not be the TFR which is the determinant of women's labor force participation, but there are other factors, including social norms, including the care economy burden. So that's why, you may not get a clear, what you call determinant. The TFR is not the clear determinant for women's labor force participation, because you don't have the care economy infrastructure support, you don't have the care economy policies. So even with the TFR, if women are not on board, either it's happening because of the social norm related determinants, or many non-economic factors, which is not related to the TFR. And yes, Ashika, you have a supplementary question?
Concluding by the
Yeah.
Lekha ji.
Yes,
We will be concluding in 5 to 3 minutes.
absolutely, absolutely. Now it's
I-
10:58. Yes.
Time. Okay. You are monitoring time so well.
Yes. So only 4 scholars spoke to me. The rest of them can write to me in my email, or we can be on Twitter together. I update my works on Twitter. Facebook also, you're welcome, but it's little personal space. I do a lot of emotional things also over there, but Twitter can be a professional space. So you can be with me on Twitter, and just the beginning. And when I come over to gift during the course of your work, we can interact further. It's not that I am running away. I'm with you.
That's it.
Yeah.
You are just started. You just have
begun the
started.
process.
I'm leaving between you and my coordinator, Dr. Parma Chakraborty. Parma, over to you.
Yes, sir. Many thanks, Professor Lekha Chakraborty, for accepting the invitation and joining us. And I'm sure our students have benefited immensely from the insightful conversation with you. We would really like to thank you on behalf of GIFT, Gulati Institute of Finance and Taxation, and we would love to have you here physically. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Parama. And all the best for the students. And we can talk later. It's just the tip, not even the tip of iceberg we have begun later. Thank you so much.